Fletcher. Now sit back and prepare to be entertained.
And welcome back to the Dripping Bucket podcast. Today we are joined by JD Evans and Andy Peloquin. Hopefully I haven't fucked up anybody's names this time. Thank you for joining us, folks.
Yeah, thank you both for coming back, this time together, to make good on the threat that I made last time Andy was on.
So today,
I'm excited.
apparently Andy and I, we are going to be taught how to write Grimdark.
Oh wait, I have to learn how to write it? Like I can read this stuff,
Yeah.
but I don't know if I can write this. This is like a next level lesson, masterclass level. I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
Exactly. We're going to do a
There's
whole
gonna be a
workshop,
test.
and by the end of the 20 minutes, you'll be a perfect sex scene writer.
Oop.
And we expect you to show your work.
This is going to be awkward for everybody.
Not Jen. I have so much faith in her because when she puts her hat on and goes like, "Listen, pals," it's like
No,
I love
I make
watching
everything
it.
awkward.
I'm
I
a
appreciate
voyeur.
A
that,
couple
Krystle.
romance novels. I'm fine.
Yeah. No,
You're good.
I've seen you school people. It's great. It's gonna be awesome. So, I guess we'll start by very briefly, kind of covering or recapping what happened last time Andy was on. Andy was talking about how you're kind of trying to break into just slightly more romantic fantasy, but you're so intimidated by the idea of doing it that you've got a co-author on with you. Have I got that right?
I've wanted to write a romantic fantasy because turns out I really like romance novels. But there's just way too much. Like reading all the romantasy novels that I have been recently, I'm like, yeah, I am not. This is not my skill set as an author.
Okay. And so you're on the market for a co-author to jump in with you, or you've already found one?
It's so I have a story planned with someone, but with all the works in progress going on between the two of us, it's sometime before the heat death of the universe. But I'm always thinking about new story ideas and all of that. So I'm like, if I can find a co-author whose style I really like, to handle all that heavy, the heavy lifting of the romance stuff, and then just let me just rip my way through whatever bad guys are in their way,
Wink, wink.
Done.
You can also rip your way through the clothes and then you'll be doing the job. It's good. That's fine.
Yeah.
So when you brought that up, I threatened to bring Jen on so that we could shame you and teach you. And when I pitched it to Jen, she was so excited, and it's only my shame that it's taken me this long to organize this. And I didn't tell Fletcher that I was doing it, so surprised. I totally forgot to tell you that I was planning this.
You've been dragged into the lesson along with me, Michael.
I'm gonna pivot.
Yeah. I may have accidentally mentioned there might be a romance angle in something I'm working on.
Yeah, you made me like teach you how to do tragic romance and stuff. So clearly this is a thing that's like percolating in both of your heads. I'm gonna take all of the credit for it. I've been a romantic influence on you. And Jen is even better at it than I am, so I'm gonna pivot really briefly to her. In a brief pitch, Jen, how would you say, what's kind of the first thing somebody jumping into romance needs to consider as a part of their craft? And then we'll bounce off of that. Oh, she's talking to the little one.
So I will apologize in
Products of
advance.
romancer.
Hold on.
Something that I have become very aware
The
of as
products
I've been
of her.
reading more romantasy is there is a very specific, not calling it a formula is, it's good for writers to have it in their head, but I think making sure that the readers don't see it as a
Yeah.
formula where it's more like a rhythm. Um, so okay,
Yeah.
as an example, I just read 4 Mages of the Wheel books back to back, basically Jen's books, and predictably,
Excellent. Yeah.
in a good way, predictably at around the 40 to 50% mark, this is where there's the first sort of steam showing up on the page, right? At around the 65 to 75%
Yeah.
mark, there is the characters are about to get down and something interrupts them, and then finally there's kind of an ending scene. And it's very expected in a way, like it's an unconscious expectation, but you see it coming, you take the time building up to it, and then it's there, and it's kind of this, will they, won't
Yeah.
they? And it does a really good job of investing
And
you.
you know they will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know they will, and it does a good job of investing you in their romance in the same way that, let's say, when writing a battle, the character can't just rip through all his enemies on the beginning. There's got to be a, oh, I'm about to win, and then the back.
Yeah.
And then the, oh, I'm about to die, and then the move forward. And so having this kind of this rhythm and flow to it, it really does a very good job of pulling you into the romance. What I've really enjoyed about Legacy of the Brightwash and about Mages of the Wheel is that there's so much story around the romance that is really, really engaging.
Yeah.
So Rachel Renner told me, listen, you need to read Court of Thorns and Roses. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, you'll find too that like that specific formula, like you threw out the percentages where the beats happen for Jen, but for a lot of authors, you'll find that each one has a different tell. Like our friend Carissa Broadbent, she makes you wait. Like she'll hold back to like about the 80% mark.
Wow.
And when the main characters finally get the chance to consummate, the next chapter is going to be the worst possible thing that's going to happen to them. And it's like, it's this bittersweet, like, yes, they finally made it, and oh no, Carissa's gonna hurt them so bad. And that expectation, like, once you notice those patterns, it adds to it if you're,
yeah, especially if you read it in a series
without knowing, rather than taking away. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's like the patented broadband sex scene where everything is about to get so much worse than you ever imagined, and yet she gives them one moment of mercy.
Usually I just read a really horrendously bad sex scene at that point.
Yeah.
The Joe Abercrombie.
I don't have this romance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Except with more corpses.
Yeah. More corpses than Joe Abercrombie is a high bar.
Well, that's something with his Age of Madness series.
So then, Jen,
he did this thing where he leaned into the sex scenes, but made them intentionally very, very awkward and very, very bad. So it kind of gave readers a little bit of the spice that they wanted, but still kept it very much the Joe Abercrombie style of, these are really flawed people.
They can't even get down good.
And I think, too, one of the first things you have to consider, particularly when you are transitioning from something like Epic or Grimdark into a more romance-focused story, that there is a difference between a sex scene in other books and a sex scene in a romance book. So there's a whole, like, gradient, if you will, of what a romance reader wants from their romance book. At the very top end, you're looking at erotica, where the story is the kind of sexual journey, and at the bottom end, you're more like at a romantic fairy tale with no open door scenes or whatever. But I know that a common complaint about romance is like they don't want sex in it if it doesn't further the story. And I think
Yeah.
what happens is that if you're not accustomed to reading romance, you don't realize that that emotional internal journey is the story. And
Is
so
the story.
there are
Right.
few instances where you have more of an internal impact than in sex. I mean, let's be honest about what happens to you, to anybody, most people, when they're having an intimate encounter, right? There's a lot going on in your head. There's a lot that's happening between
Yeah.
two people. There are new levels being reached mentally, physically, emotionally, no matter what you go into that intimacy expecting. And so when you do that in a book, and in a romance book, that intimacy is part of the story. It isn't just there for titillation, although I would say that
Yeah.
there is an arm of fantasy romance that's kind of going in that more the titillation direction than the stronger emotional arc.
And I think this is where a lot of the complaints
Although
come
You can
I
from.
throw a
always
sex
make the
scene in, just
argument
like
that
yeah.
yeah. I always make the argument that we're reading fiction for, you know, escapism, pleasure, whatever you want to call it. So calling it just for titillation is like, yeah, that's why I'm reading this book. Thanks. Like, even if it's a bloody, gory battle scene, I've read it for pleasure. So, like, get off my back. Let me have my pleasurable sex scenes.
Right. And there's no right way to phrase something to encompass every reader and why they're in that book and what they're getting out of it or what their favorite part is, right? But in general, I always argue that romance readers are reading for the emotion. And I know you could argue that that's true of any fantasy reader. You're kind of going, and even especially Grimdark, they're just kind of going for a different in route to their emotions than a romance reader. Look, together they make a heart. And so
yeah, there you go.
I think what I have been seeing actually recently in some complaints about, and these aren't universal. I mean, I'm just going to caveat nothing that I say is meant to like blank broad stroke everything, right? So I've been seeing a little bit of a complaint within the romance genre of fantasy specifically that sometimes we're trading that kind of emotional tension, that waiting, like, will they, won't they? That's actually getting traded for this very shallow concept of enemies to lovers. So they put in this idea, they hate each other, and that is supposed to create the tension that the readers want, but it isn't quite the same. If these two people hate each other, but character A gets a boner every time he sees the girl, but he hates her. Do you know what I mean? Like that's not quite the tension that most of us are reading for. So it's just interesting because it's different for everybody. But for me, like that's not usually what I'm reading for. So you're gonna see people all over the place with that.
Yeah. So my
writing good emotion has got to be like one of the most difficult parts of writing any fiction.
Any book. Yep. Any book.
So I mentioned
which brings you to the
Rachel. Go ahead.
No, we're opening the floor for you, Andy.
I was going to say that Rachel told me to read Court of Thorns and Roses and then Reign and Ruin, right? And I was reading through A Court of Thorns and Roses, and my biggest complaint was that it was this fated mates sort of thing where it was like they were so perfect for each other that it just jumped all the way to the end, right? It got to now we hate each other and then all of a sudden we like each other, right? And it skipped so much, but it's the same thing that you would get if you did a battle scene that was just kind of shoehorned in that it was just like, okay, it's been a while since we've had some action, let's kill some people with no real consequence to the story, no real setup, no real payoff, nothing to it. So I think a lot of the complaints that come from people who are bothered by this new trend in romance and romantasy is that you're getting only the shallow without the time spent building the dynamic between the two characters. Like all of the romantasy books that I've really, really enjoyed, the sex was it served a purpose to the story. It didn't serve a purpose to me, the reader. It said, okay, this is organic to who the characters are. Whatever led them to be together, it was true to them. And it gave me, like you were saying, it's these emotional reveals. It's kind of like the musical reveals things to you in song. All the big emotional moments basically happen through sex, or a lot of them happen through sex or the spicier scenes in Romantasy. So understanding that, like going into that with that mentality, I think that's what makes a very, very engaging and real feeling Romantasy novel, as opposed to, oh, here's a whole bunch of sex scenes that don't really do anything, but just, keep you coming back for the smut of it all.
Well, like you said earlier, both of you said earlier, that's the same with a really detailed battle scene or gory fights that can serve to create an emotional impact, or it can just be gratuitous blood splatter that doesn't do anything. I've actually just recently read 2 books that have a very similar opening, in that somebody important to the main character is killed very early, and one of them did a really good job and one of them fell a little flat, because if you're going to kill somebody off, you have to establish that matters, right? That's why everybody loves George R. Martin. You don't know who he's going to kill off, and they all matter. So it makes an impact. Whereas if I'm just killing off side character B, it just doesn't make a difference, right? So, and it's just like that with sex scenes. Is it can make an emotional impact, or it can just bog down the story. And yeah.
And they should end with someone being killed off.
You could just combine them into one
praying mantises.
Really messy scene, right? Yeah.
That's either some really good sex or some really bad sex.
Grim romantic
in one scene.
It depends on what side you're on. Like if you're in dark romantasy, you might be right there. It might fit right in.
It's gonna take me a second to recover from that. Okay. Now I want to. No, now I want to write. Now I want to write that.
No, don't do. No,
my
don't.
brain is spun off. Fine.
That would be an unusual interruption. Like I apologize for
it would be
to run Smalls upstairs. But so basically, he was talking about the interrupts I've done in my sex scenes or whatever. That would be a bad interruption.
Very much so.
Like mid-coitus murder. Is that a trope?
That's where the Fletcher patented romantic necromancy comes in real handy.
Oh my goodness.
Typecast fairly there.
I mean, you wrote a whole trilogy of guy does war crimes because wants girlfriend be hot again. So
which season is this? I immediately need to go read it.
Yeah.
See, that's the Blackstone Heart trilogy, Obsidian Path trilogy, starting with Blackstone Heart.
Hopefully, there's some other stuff going on in there as well, and it's not quite just that. But there's a level at which that is not an inaccurate description of that series.
It's also
describe your book badly.
Yeah. It's also a deeply introspective study of what makes us who we are and who we are if we don't remember what we've done, et cetera, the usual. But also, more importantly, romantic necromancy.
I like it. So, right, I feel like these guys are strong enough writers that I'm not really worried about their romantic. I think one of the things to remember is that romance gets simplified, by people that aren't really romance readers. And it's no less complicated when written well, than writing any other plot line, because you still, every plot line needs those tension points, those pinch points and turning points. And did you guys lose me? My headset's freaking out. Is it okay?
No, we
Nope.
I'm
still
just having
hear
all
you.
the
So if
problems.
I
you
would
can
almost
hear us, we're
argue
good.
that writing good sort of romantic fantasy is almost more complicated, in the sense that you're having to deal with like you're dealing with whatever the story is, and then you're having to deal with the romance of so if you're writing a character who is dealing with other people, the problems are, they're going to be there, but they're not necessarily going to be so fundamental as you would like with the romance, right? Whatever the character is, he can't fall in love because of past scars, so he's working through his scars, whatever. It's a lot to write through. And then if you have to do it around a good story at the same time, it's almost like you're working with two separate entities coming together, as opposed to an epic fantasy, or a dark or whatever. You have some of these character dynamics, but the big character growth isn't necessarily always as fundamental or right away as with romance. Like, romance is all about, like you were saying, the emotion, the underlying emotion that makes them unsuitable for or suitable for a romance.
Right.
I'm inclined to like that argument, because
It makes you look good.
that's probably right. But I would say, yeah, exactly. I would say, though, like, on the, almost to argue with you, the secret to nailing it is the same as the secret to getting good at battle scenes, is you just write a lot of really shit stuff for a long, long time. And then eventually you get decent at it, and then you get some feedback and you go, oh, okay, I guess I'll do that then. So I think it's just layers, I guess. It's like, it's a layer cake that you're trying to put together, or maybe not even a layer cake, but one of those really complicated French desserts that's like creme, and then a cake, and then also a gelée. But if you break it down into
Nobody
its
knows what you're
individual
saying,
components,
Krystle.
it's all
Yeah,
whatever.
I'm so lost.
I
It's
like
like,
baking.
you're having dessert
I
now.
like that. I like watching that French guy, the French
Oh, yeah.
chocolatier guy.
Oh,
I don't remember what his name
the
is.
one that makes that
Yeah.
one chocolate dragon that looks like a penis. It looks like a penis when he starts.
For like half of it. Yeah. Yep, that's the one.
Yeah,
I
I mean, it was the best bait and switch I have ever seen.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Usually,
it was a giant chocolate penis. It was. It's not even a stretch. It's the reason it got so many views, because everybody's like,
not.
is he sculpting a giant chocolate penis? He was not.
And then
Spoiler, it was a dragon.
It's a dragon. Yeah. Which is like kind of a perfect fantasy romance analogy, isn't it? Like,
it is, actually. You started with a giant chocolate penis, and by the end you have a dragon.
I'd almost argue it's the inverse. You start with the dragon, and then it goes in the other way.
I thought I wouldn't make it awkward.
You know what? I think you're right.
Giant
I think Andy's right.
Fair enough. That's a fair argument. Yep.
Oh, I knew this was gonna be a good panel. Oh, I think we did lose Jen now. Maybe on that note, we'll cut the first episode, and then we'll see if Jen can recover her internet to come make us laugh some more. So I'll just say really quick, thank you, Andy, for coming, and I'm sorry we interrupted you so much. Jen and I talk a lot. And we'll be back shortly, as soon as Jen can unfreeze her internet.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, there you are.
I don't know what it is about talking to you guys. It always fries my computer.
We talk too much. It's too much processing. So I'll kick us off the end of this episode, and we'll jump back in a sec.
All right.
Sounds good. All right. Ciao.